The morning sun filtered through the crystalline dome of the Galactic Academy's main lecture hall, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled students from 17 different worlds. Professor Velkith stood at the front of the classroom, his four nervous eyes blinking in sequence as he prepared to make an announcement that would change how every student in that room understood humanity forever. He was a Deshan, tall and spindly, with translucent blue skin that revealed the gentle pulse of his 3 hearts whenever he became anxious. Which was often today. His hearts were beating faster than usual because field trip season had arrived. "Students," he announced, his voice carrying through the universal translators embedded in every desk. "I am pleased to inform you that this semester's Xenobiology expedition has been approved by the Galactic Education Council." Ah, murmur of excitement rippled through the room. Cricks. A Valorian whose body was composed of living crystal that chimed softly when she moved leaned forward with interest beside her. Jinra the Malorian pulsed with curious blue light, his gelatinous form quivering in his specially designed containment seat. In the back corner sat Mox, a small furry Katrani with enormous ears that could hear a whisper from across the room. And next to Mox sat the only human in the entire academy. Emma Chun was 22 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and an expression of perpetual amusement that her classmates had never quite understood right. Now she was eating something red and round that appeared to be fighting back, its juice running down her fingers as she bit into it with obvious satisfaction. "Our destination," Professor Velkith continued, "will be Kepler 442b, a Class 2 hazardous world featuring elevated ultraviolet radiation and documented predatory fauna." The classroom erupted into excited chatter, and within moments, datapads appeared on every desk as students began accessing the required documentation. Cricks pulled up a holographic display showing no fewer than 47 separate forms that needed to be completed, signed, and verified before any Valorian citizen could set foot on a hazardous world. "I will need my government's permission slip first," she said to Jinra, her crystalline voice chiming with each word. "Then the medical clearance from the Valorian Health Ministry. Then the psychological fitness evaluation from the Academy's counseling department." Jinra's bioluminescent patches flickered in agreement as he accessed his own species' requirements. "The Malorian Collective requires a full genetic backup before any expedition," he gurgled through his translator, "as well as insurance documentation guaranteeing emergency extraction within 15 standard minutes of any distress signal." Around the room, similar conversations were happening at every desk. The Kitrani students were discussing their mandatory fear response training certifications. The insectoid Rexil were comparing notes on their required environmental suit specifications. Even the silicon-based Gorthians, who were largely immune to biological hazards, were reviewing their extensive liability waivers. Professor Velkith nodded approvingly at his diligent students, his heart settling into a calmer rhythm. Then his gaze fell upon Emma Chun, who had finished her aggressive fruit and was now wiping her hands on her pants with no apparent concern for the administrative preparations happening around her. "Miss Chun," he called out, and every translator in the room carried his words with a slight undertone of confusion. "I notice you have not accessed the documentation portal." Emma looked up with an expression of genuine puzzlement. "The documentation portal," Velkith repeated, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly. "For your permission forms and safety certifications." "My what now?" The classroom fell absolutely silent. Crix turned in her seat, her crystal body catching the light as she stared at the human with something approaching disbelief. "Your permission forms," she explained slowly, as if speaking to a very young child, "from your government, your medical board, your psychological evaluation committee." Emma's face shifted through several expressions before settling on amused understanding. "Oh," she said. And then she laughed. She actually laughed. a warm human sound that the translators struggled to process because it contained no distress indicators despite the topic at hand. "I don't need any of that," Emma said casually. "I'm 22 years old and I just go places." Professor Velkith felt all three of his hearts skip simultaneously. "You just go places?" he repeated, certain the translator had malfunctioned. "Yeah," Emma confirmed, leaning back in her chair with the easy confidence of someone who had never once considered that traveling to a hazardous world might require bureaucratic approval. "I packed a bag and I got on a ship, and here I am at your academy, and I'll pack another bag and go on your field trip. And that's pretty much the whole process." Jinra's entire gelatinous body had shifted to a distressed orange color. "But what about governmental oversight of your safety?" he asked, his translator crackling with concern. "What about medical verification that you are physically capable of surviving environmental hazards?" Crix added, her crystal form vibrating at frequencies associated with extreme confusion. "What about psychological assessment to ensure you will not panic in dangerous situations?" Mox whispered from across the room, his enormous ears flattened against his head. Emma considered these questions for a moment, her head tilting slightly in a gesture her classmates had learned to associate with humans, finding something unexpectedly funny. "I mean, I've been camping since I was 6, she said, as if this explained everything. "And I broke my arm falling out of a tree when I was 8, and my mom just drove me to the hospital. And I've been in 2 car accidents and 1 earthquake, and that time the neighbor's dog bit me pretty bad. So I figure I'll probably be fine on your Class 2 planet." "Professor." Velkith gripped the edge of his podium with his long, translucent fingers. "You have experienced vehicular accidents and seismic events and animal attacks," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "And your species considers this normal childhood development. I mean, the dog thing was a little unusual," Emma admitted. "Most dogs are pretty friendly." The silence that followed was so complete that Crix could hear the gentle hum of her own crystalline structure processing stress hormones. Finally, Jinra spoke, his bioluminescence flickering with a mixture of horror and fascination. "What is this camping you mentioned?" Emma's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, it's great," she said. "Basically, the adults drop you off in the wilderness with minimal supplies, and you have to figure out how to survive for a week or 2. And you learn to build fires and find water and identify which plants won't kill you. And sometimes there are bears, but usually they leave you alone if you store your food properly. They abandon their young in wilderness." Jinra broadcast to the entire room, his color shifting to pure white with alarm. "As a recreational activity, it builds character," Emma said with a shrug. The universal translators across the room all displayed the same error message simultaneously, indicating that the phrase "builds character" had no equivalent concept in any of the 17 languages represented in the classroom. Professor Velkith made a decision in that moment that he would later record in his personal research notes as the beginning of my understanding of humanity, Miss Chun, he said carefully, his 4 eyes fixed upon her with new intensity. "I believe I will need to research your species' approach to education before this field trip commences." Emma just smiled and reached into her bag for another piece of fruit. This one was yellow and curved and apparently not fighting back. But somehow that made it seem even more suspicious to her classmates. They were beginning to realize that everything about humans was suspicious, and they had not even left the classroom yet. The shuttle descended through the purple atmosphere of Kepler 442b with the smooth precision of galactic engineering, and every student aboard except one was gripping their safety harnesses with varying degrees of Terrorcolor 442b was beautiful. In the way that dangerous things often are, wind suns hung in the lavender sky, casting double shadows across a landscape of violet vegetation, and silver-blue rivers. Mountains rose in the distance, with peaks that glowed faintly orange from mineral deposits. and forests of towering plants with leaves like stained glass windows stretched toward the horizon. The atmospheric readings scrolled across every student's personal display unit, showing elevated radiation levels, trace compounds that required filtration for 12 of the 17 species present, and ambient temperature ranges that fluctuated more dramatically than most galactic citizens found comfortable. 3 of the Katrani students had already activated their anxiety medication. The Valorians were running continuous diagnostic checks on their environmental suits. The Malorians had confirmed their emergency extraction beacon frequencies, no fewer than 7 times. Emma-chan had her face pressed against the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. "This is amazing," she breathed, her voice carrying genuine wonder. "Look at those colors. I've never seen purple trees before. This is so cool." Crix observed the human with growing fascination. The same environmental data that was triggering stress responses in every other student seemed to be producing excitement in Emma. It was as if her species had somehow evolved to find danger appealing. The shuttle touched down in a clearing that had been designated as a safe landing zone by 3 separate survey teams over the course of 18 months of careful preparation. Professor Velketh stood at the exit hatch and delivered a speech about safety protocols that lasted exactly 12 minutes and referenced 47 different emergency procedures. Every student listened attentively and confirmed their understanding through their datapad. Simone was already bouncing on her heels with impatience when the hatch finally opened. The alien students emerged in careful formation, their sensors sweeping the environment for threats while their translators processed the unfamiliar sounds of an alien ecosystem. Emma stepped out, took a deep breath of the filtered air coming through her simple face mask, and grinned. "Oh, this is way better than Arizona in July," she announced to no one in particular. Mox approached her with his enormous ears, swiveling to catch every sound from the surrounding forest. "What is Arizona?" he whispered. "A place on Earth where it gets really hot and there are lots of things that want to bite you," Emma explained. "Scorpions, rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, the occasional mountain lion if you're unlucky." "And you have visited this Arizona voluntarily?" Mox asked. "I lived there for 2 years during university," Emma said cheerfully. "Great." Hiking trails. Mox's ears flattened against his head, and he retreated to walk closer to Professor Velketh. Class made their way along a pre-approved path toward their first observation site, a patch of bioluminescent fungi that represented the primary research opportunity of the expedition. The alien students moved with careful attention to their surroundings, their various sensors and protective equipment humming with activity. Emma walked with her hands in her pockets, occasionally stopping to look more closely at interesting plants or to watch small creatures scurry through the underbrush. "Miss Chun," Professor Velketh called back to her, "please remain with the group and refrain from approaching unidentified flora." "Sorry, Professor," Emma said, jogging to catch up. "It's just that those vine things look exactly like kudzu from back home, and I wanted to see if they grew the same way." "Kudzu," Velketh repeated, his translator providing no useful context. "It's a plant that basically eats the southern United States," Emma explained. "It grows so fast you can almost watch it move. And it covers everything: trees, buildings, abandoned cars, people if they sit still too long. An invasive plant species that grows fast enough to engulf structures." Jin repulsed. "And you speak of it with fondness rather than alarm. It's pretty annoying, honestly," Emma admitted. "But there's something kind of impressive about a plant that just refuses to stop, no matter what you do to it." The class reached the fungi observation site and began their scientific documentation work for nearly an hour. Everything proceeded according to plan. The bioluminescent organisms pulsed with gentle light in response to the students' presence, and Professor Velketh delivered a fascinating lecture about their unique biochemistry while the students recorded. Data on their various devices. Emma was crouched near a particularly bright cluster of fungi, sketching their patterns in a small notebook she had brought because she said she liked drawing things by hand. When the attack happened, it emerged from the underbrush with terrifying speed. A six-legged predator, roughly the size of a large dog, with venomous spines running along its back and more eyes than any creature reasonably needed. It was making a sound that every translator simultaneously identified as aggressive territorial warning. Professor Velkith initiated emergency protocols. Immediately, all students activate defensive barriers, he shouted, his four eyes wide with panic. Emergency beacons now. Form protective formation around the most vulnerable species. The alien students responded with practiced efficiency, despite their terracrystalline barriers hummed to life around. The Valorians sealed their containment units to maximum protection. The Kidrani activated noise-canceling fields to protect their sensitive hearing from the creature's horrible sounds. Distress signals were transmitted to the orbiting ship. Incident reports began auto-generating on 17 different governmental databases. Emma stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on the creature with an intensity that made Crix's crystal structure vibrate with unexpected frequencies. The predator was now pacing at the edge of the clearing, its many eyes focused on the cluster of strange beings who had invaded its territory. It was deciding whether they were threats or prey. Emma bent down and picked up a rock. It was a good rock, Crix would later note in her personal journal. Smooth and heavy and fitting perfectly in the human's hand, as if she had spent her entire life selecting rocks for exactly this purpose. Emma threw it. The rock sailed through the air with remarkable accuracy and struck the ground directly in front of the predator with a sharp crack that echoed through the clearing at the same moment. Emma shouted. It was not a scream of fear or a cry for help. It was something older and more primal, a sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest and carried across the clearing like a physical force. The predator made a startled noise that the translators could not process because it had never been recorded before. Then it turned and fled into the underbrush, its 6 legs carrying it away from the strange loud creature that had demonstrated both accuracy and aggression. The clearing fell silent except for the gentle pulse of the bioluminescent fungi. Every alien student stared at Emma Chun with expressions their species used to convey profound shock. Why would you engage with it? Crix finally asked, her crystalline voice trembling with frequencies associated with extreme stress. Why would you provoke a territorial predator rather than retreat behind protective barriers? Emma was still watching the tree line with an alertness that seemed entirely different from her usual cheerful demeanor. There was something in her posture now, something coiled and ready, that made her look less like a student and more like something that belonged in the dangerous wilderness around them. It was just curious, she said, her voice calm and measured. It didn't know what we were, so it was trying to figure out if we were worth the trouble of attacking. And your response was to throw projectiles and make threatening vocalizations? Professor Velkith asked, his voice faint with disbelief. You make yourself big and you make noise, and you show them you're not easy prey, Emma explained, finally relaxing her stance as she determined the threat had truly passed. Works on most things on your death world. Mox whispered from somewhere behind the Kitrani defensive formation. Emma turned to face her classmates, and her usual warm smile returned as if she had not just single-handedly driven off a venomous alien predator with a rock and sheer audacity. Yeah, she admitted, Earth has a lot of things that want to eat you, so you learn pretty early how to convince them to go find easier food. You have predator confrontation training as children? Jinra asked, his bioluminescence still flickering with residual alarm. I mean, they teach you what to do if you see a bear or mountain lion, Emma said. Stay calm, look big, make noise. Don't run because running triggers their chase instinct. Predators on your world will chase you if you flee. Crick said slowly. So, you are trained to stand your ground against creatures that could kill you. Pretty much. Professor Velketh looked down at his 4 hands and realized they were shaking. Had spent 40 years studying xenobiology across dozens of worlds. And he had never once seen a student respond to a predator encounter by going on the offensive. The emergency response team from the orbiting ship was already inbound, alerted by the distress signals that had been automatically transmitted forms. Were being generated incident reviews, were being scheduled psychological evaluation. Requests were being filed for every student who had witnessed the event had already returned. The transport vessel hummed with the quiet efficiency of galactic engineering as it carried the xenobiology class through the darkness. Between stars, 3 days had passed since the announcement, and every student except one had completed their required documentation. Valorians had submitted their 47 forms and received crystalline certification, badges that they wore with obvious pride. The Valorians had uploaded their genetic backups and received confirmation that emergency extraction pods were standing by in 3 separate orbital positions. The Katrani had passed their fear response training refreshers and were now equipped with anxiety medication calibrated to their exact neurological profiles. Emma Chun had packed a backpack. The common area of the transport ship had become an informal gathering space where students compared their preparations. And it was here that the true scope of human strangeness began to reveal itself. Crix had laid out her survival kit on one of the low tables, her crystalline fingers moving with precise care as she explained each item to the curious Mox. "This is my hermetically sealed environmental suit," she chimed, indicating a folded bundle of shimmering material, rated for 17 different atmospheric compositions and capable of maintaining internal temperature within 0.3 degrees of optimal Valorian comfort. "Very impressive," Mox whispered. His enormous ears perked forward with interest. "And this," Crix continued, lifting a small case that glowed faintly blue, "contains antivenom compounds for the 43 most common toxins found on Class II worlds, along with 17 additional compounds specific to Kepler 442b's documented fauna." Jinra pulsed with approval from his containment unit nearby. "I have similar preparations," he gurgled, "plus a portable stasis pod capable of preserving my biological processes for up to 72 hours in the event of catastrophic cellular damage." The other students nodded with understanding, each of them equipped with species-specific survival gear that had been designed by committees of experts and approved by multiple governmental bodies. Then Emma walked in with her backpack. It was a simple thing, made of faded green fabric with a few patches sewn onto it and straps that showed signs of wear. She dropped it onto the table next to Crix's precision-engineered survival kit, and the contrast was so striking that several students made sounds of involuntary concern. "Is that your emergency equipment?" Crix asked, her crystal form flickering with disbelief. "Yep," Emma said cheerfully, unzipping the main compartment. "I've got water bottles, some protein bars, trail mix, beef jerky for if I get really hungry, a knife, some rope, a lighter, waterproof matches as backup for the lighter, a tarp, a first aid kit, sunscreen, bug spray, and a hat." She held up the hat as if it were a perfectly reasonable piece of survival equipment. Ted had a picture of a cartoon cat on it. "That is your entire preparation?" Jinra asked, his bioluminescence shifting through several colors that the translator identified as confusion, concern, and something approaching existential dread. "I mean, I'm also wearing sturdy boots," Emma said, lifting one foot to display a worn leather boot that looked like it had survived several adventures already. "And I've got a jacket in case it gets cold." Professor Velketh, who had been observing from across the room while pretending to read academic journals, felt his three hearts begin their anxious rhythm once again, he approached the table with careful steps, his four eyes examining Emma's equipment with scientific curiosity. "Miss Chun," he said, "I notice your first aid kit appears to be quite small." Emma opened the kit to reveal its contents, and the ship's medical officer, a sixth Lindeshan named Dr. Morvax, who had been passing by, actually stopped walking to stare. "These are adhesive bandages," Dr. Morvax said, pointing with one of his upper limbs. "And this appears to be a simple antiseptic solution, and this is basic pain medication. And this is thread and a needle for stitches," Emma confirmed, "in case I cut myself badly enough to need them." "You would perform surgical procedures on yourself?" Dr. Morvax asked, all six of his eyes wide with horror. "I mean, ideally someone else would do it," Emma admitted. "But I took a wilderness first aid course, and I'm pretty confident I could manage if I had to." The medical officer excused himself and walked away very quickly, muttering about updating his incident preparation protocols. Crix reached out with one crystalline finger and carefully touched the fabric of Emma's backpack, as if she expected it to be some kind of advanced technology disguised as primitive materials. "This is just cloth," she said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "Canvas. Technically," Emma said, "it's pretty tough. And my dad gave it to me when I was 16, so it's got sentimental value." "Sentimental value?" Mox repeated, his whispered voice somehow conveying profound confusion. "You are bringing equipment to a hazardous world based on emotional attachment rather than survival optimization." Emma considered this for a moment. "I guess I'm also bringing it because it works," she said. "I've used this backpack for 6 years of camping trips and hiking expeditions, and that one time I got lost in the mountains for 3 days. And it hasn't let me down yet." The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of the ship's engines. "You were lost in mountains for 3 days," Jinra finally said, his entire body pulsing with alarm. "And you are sharing this information casually as if it were a minor inconvenience." "It was pretty minor," Emma said with a shrug. "I found a stream and followed it downhill until I hit a road, and then I walked until I found a town. And I called my mom and she was pretty mad, but mostly just glad I was okay." "Your parent was angry that you survived a wilderness emergency?" Crix asked. "She was angry that I didn't tell anyone I was changing my hiking route." Emma explained, which, fair point, I should have done that. Lesson learned. Professor Velkith had been taking notes on his datapad throughout this conversation, and he now looked up with an expression that his students had never seen before. It was the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the universe had begun to shift. "Miss Chun," he said slowly, "I have been researching your homeworld since our conversation in the classroom, and I must ask you a question that has been troubling me greatly." "Sure," Emma said, zipping her backpack closed. "Go ahead." "Your planet Earth," Velkith said, "experiences regular seismic events, violent atmospheric phenomena, volcanic eruptions, flooding, extreme temperature variations, and hosts millions of species of predators, parasites, and pathogens that could kill an unprotected human in countless ways." "Yeah, that's pretty accurate," Emma agreed. "And your species," Velkith continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "evolved in this environment and not only survived, but became the dominant life form and developed spacefaring technology." "Also accurate." Velkith set down his datapad and looked at Emma with all four of his eyes. "How?" he asked. Simply Emma smiled. And for just a moment her classmates caught a glimpse of something ancient and fierce behind her cheerful expression. "We're really stubborn," she said, "and we work well in groups. And we're pretty good at figuring things out as we go." She picked up her battered backpack and slung it over one shoulder. "Also, we have this thing called spite," she added. "Where if something tries to kill us, we get mad about it and try even harder to survive. The translator flagged spite as a partially translatable concept with dangerous implications. Crix watched the human walk away toward her sleeping quarters, her crystal form humming with frequencies she had never produced before. "I believe," she said quietly to Jinra, "that we have significantly underestimated what we are dealing with." Jinra pulsed in solemn agreement somewhere in the ship. The Morvax was requesting additional medical supplies and wondering if early retirement was still an option. The weather satellite had failed them. Professor Velketh would later write in his incident report that the electromagnetic storm had developed with unprecedented speed, overwhelming the orbital monitoring systems before any warning could be transmitted to the surface team. But that would come later. After the rescue, after the debriefings, after 17 different governmental agencies had filed their official complaints about inadequate safety protocols. Right now, standing in the middle of an alien wilderness with communications down and the shuttle's navigation system scrambled, Professor Velketh was experiencing what humans apparently called panic. The sky had turned from lavender to a sickly green color that made every student's threat assessment systems activate simultaneously. Lightning crackled between the twin suns and the horizon, and the air had begun to smell like something Crix's translator could only describe as dangerous electricity. "We must return to the shuttle immediately," Velketh announced, his voice tight with controlled fear. "The shuttle's navigation is offline." One of the Valorian students reported, her crystalline form flickering with distress. "And our backup communications require approximately 6 hours to establish contact with the orbital station through alternative frequencies." 6 hours. Jinra pulsed, his entire body shifting to a color that indicated extreme alarm. "But the atmospheric readings suggest the storm will reach our position in less than 1 hour." Mox's ears were pressed flat against his skull as he whispered, "We should initiate emergency shelter protocols and wait for rescue." Professor Velketh nodded and began the process of submitting emergency documentation through the backup channels that would take 6 hours to establish. It was proper procedure. It was what the regulations required. It was. Emma-chun realized, completely inadequate for keeping anyone alive, she had been watching the sky with an expression her classmates had not seen before. Something focused and calculating that made her look older than her 22 years now. She turned to face the group with a decisiveness that seemed to demand attention. "We need shelter," she said, her voice cutting through the panic chatter. "Real shelter, not emergency protocols, not documentation, actual physical protection from that storm. We should wait for rescue protocols to be established," Velketh insisted. Even as the first drops of rain began to fall, the rain sizzled slightly where it touched exposed surfaces. Crix's environmental suit immediately flagged the precipitation as mildly acidic. Prolonged exposure not recommended. Emma was already moving. She had spotted a rocky outcropping nearby that would provide some natural protection, and she was walking toward it with the confident stride of someone who had made survival decisions before. "Everyone follow me," she called back, "and grab any large branches or leaves you can carry safely." For a moment, no one moved. The alien students looked at Professor Velketh, waiting for him to provide guidance through proper channels and approved methodologies. Vect looked at Emma, then at the sky, then at the acidic rain that was beginning to fall more heavily. "Follow the human," he said quietly. It was the first time in his 40-year academic career that he had deviated from established protocols. The class gathered materials as they moved toward the outcropping, their survival instincts overriding their bureaucratic training. As the storm grew closer, Emma had already begun working. By the time they arrived, she was bending long, flexible branches into curved shapes and wedging them between rocks to create a framework. Her movements were quick and efficient, born from years of practice that her classmates were only beginning to understand. "Crix, your crystalline structure is strong enough to help me lift this larger branch," Emma said without looking up. "Jinra, You can ooze into the gaps between these rocks and tell me if there's enough space for everyone. Mox, I need your ears to tell me which direction the storm is coming from, so we can position the opening correctly. The alien students found themselves following her instructions without question. There was something in Emma's voice that brooked no argument. A command quality that seemed to emerge naturally in crisis situations. Velth watched in amazement as his diverse class of alien students worked together under human direction, their species-specific abilities being utilized with remarkable efficiency. Valorians used their crystal strength to bend and position heavy materials. The Malorians flowed into crevices to assess structural integrity. The Katrani listened for approaching danger and provided early warning, and Emma-chan orchestrated all of it while simultaneously constructing a shelter with her own hands in less than an hour. Something remarkable had taken shape. It was not elegant by any galactic standard. It would never appear in architectural journals or receive approval from safety committees, but it was solid, waterproof, and large enough to shelter every member of the expedition from the storm that was now visible on the horizon as a wall of green lightning and acidic rain. Everyone inside, Emma ordered. Malorians in the center where the structural protection is strongest. Katrani near the back where the noise will be dampened. Valorians can help reinforce the entrance once everyone is through. The students filed into the shelter. With a mixture of relief and awe, Professor Velkith was the last to enter, pausing at the entrance to look at Emma with all four of his eyes. "You learned to do this in your wilderness camps?" he asked. "Some of it," Emma admitted, adjusting a branch to better seal a gap in the roof. "But mostly you just learned to look at what you have and figure out what you can do with it. And if you had not known how to build this shelter," Emma shrugged, a gesture that seemed remarkably casual given the circumstances, "then I would have figured it out as I went along. Or I would have tried something else that might work. Or I would have failed, and we'd all be in trouble. That is not a comforting approach to survival." Velkith observed. "No," Emma agreed. "But it's the one that works when you don't have time for comforting approaches." She finished her adjustments and crawled into the shelter. Just as the full force of the storm arrived, the sound was tremendous. A roaring crash of wind and rain and electricity that made even the noise-canceling fields of the Katrani students struggle to keep up. But inside the shelter, the students were dry and protected. The acidic rain drummed against the improvised roof. Without penetrating, the wind howled around them, but could not reach them. 12 alien students huddled in a structure built by human hands, watching a 22-year-old apex predator casually reinforce weak points in the walls while humming something she called a sea shanty. The humming seemed to help. There was something about the simple human melody that cut through the terror of the storm. A reminder that somewhere in the universe there was a species that had learned to make music while surviving disasters. Mox was the first to break the silence inside the shelter. "Your species," he whispered, his enormous ears still flat against his head. "You do not fear death." Emma stopped humming and looked at the small furry alien with an expression that was suddenly very serious. "We fear it plenty," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Trust me, humans are terrified of death. We write stories about it and make art about it and entire religions about what happens after it. Then why do you act as if you are not afraid?" Crix asked, her crystalline form still humming with residual stress. "Why do you run toward danger instead of away from it?" Emma was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same intensity she had used to assess the predator earlier. "Fear is useful," she finally said. "It keeps you sharp. It tells you when something is dangerous. It makes your heart beat faster and your senses get clearer." She looked around at the frightened faces of her classmates, alien beings from worlds where safety was assumed and danger was an anomaly. "But if you let fear make your decisions for you," she continued, "if you freeze up and wait for someone else to save you, then you're already dead. You just haven't stopped breathing yet. The storm raged outside, but inside the shelter something had shifted. The alien students were looking at Emma differently now. Seeing not just the cheerful exchange student with her battered backpack and aggressive fruits, but something older and more fundamental, they were seeing a survivor on your world. Jinra pulsed carefully, his bioluminescence dim but steady. Every member of your species carries this knowledge. Pretty much, Emma said. I mean, some people forget it because modern civilization is pretty comfortable, but it's in there. That instinct to fight and adapt and keep going no matter what. That seems exhausting. Mox whispered. Emma laughed, a warm, genuine sound that somehow made the shelter feel safer. It is, she admitted, but it's also why we're here, you know? Billions of years of our ancestors refusing to die, refusing to give up, just stubborn enough. And angry enough to keep surviving until they could look up at the stars and say, yeah, we're going there too. Professor Velkith had been listening in silence, his 4 eyes fixed on the human with an expression of profound reevaluation. You did not build this shelter because you were trained to, he said slowly. You built it because failure was not an option you were willing to accept. Failure is always an option. Emma corrected gently. But giving up isn't. Does that make sense? You can try something and fail, but you have to try. Outside. The storm continued its assault on the alien landscape inside. A classroom of galactic citizens sat in a primitive shelter built. The rescue shuttle descended through the morning light of Kepler 442b to find something. Its crew had not expected all students were alive and well-known. Emergency medical intervention was required, no. Psychological trauma specialists needed to be deployed immediately. Instead, 12 alien students and 1 human were sitting outside a remarkably sturdy improvised shelter, sharing what appeared to be breakfast from the human's backpack. The rescue team's leader, a seasoned Deshan named Commander Vix, who had coordinated over 300 emergency extractions in her career, stared at the scene with visible confusion. Professor Velkith, she said as she approached the group. We received emergency distress signals indicating a predator encounter, navigation failure, communications blackout, and an electromagnetic storm of unusual intensity. All accurate, Velkith confirmed, rising to greet her with the tired dignity of someone who had survived a very long night. And yet everyone is unharmed. Velkith glanced back at Emma-chan, who was teaching Mox how to open a Daya package of something called beef jerky. We had human assistance, he said simply. Commander Vix's 4 eyes blinked in the slow sequence that Deshans used to indicate. They needed more information, but were not sure. They wanted it. The return journey to the Galactic Academy was quiet, in a way that felt different from the anxious silence of the trip-out students sat in small groups, speaking softly about what they had experienced and what it meant. Emma slept through most of it, curled up in her seat with her battered backpack as a pillow, apparently unbothered by the fact that she had saved 12 lives through sheer stubborn competence. Rix spent the journey researching. She accessed every database available to her crystalline neural network, pulling information about Earth that she had never thought to look for. Before, the data was horrifying. Earthquakes that could level cities in seconds, hurricanes that spanned thousands of kilometers and generated winds strong enough to lift vehicles into the air, volcanic eruptions that could alter global climate patterns, floods, droughts, ice ages, heat waves, and mass extinction events scattered throughout the planet's geological record, and the life forms predators with teeth, designed for tearing flesh, parasites that could hijack neural systems and alter behavior, venomous creatures in nearly every ecosystem, pathogens that evolve faster than most galactic species could develop immunity, and the sun itself, the star that Earth orbited, constantly bombarding the planet with radiation that could cause cellular mutation and death. Griggs looked at the sleeping human, and felt. Something she had never felt before was respect. But deeper than respected was the recognition that she was looking at something extraordinary. A being whose entire existence was a victory against impossible odds when the transport docked at the academy. The students were met by a delegation of concerned administrators who had been monitoring the incident reports from orbit. There would be investigations. There would be reviews. There would be a 200-page document that Professor Velkith would spend 3 months writing. And that would spark a complete restructuring of the Academy's policies regarding Deathworld students. But before all of that, in the quiet corridor leading from the docking bay to the main campus, Crix approached Emma the human, looked tired but content. Her backpack slung over one shoulder and her cartoon cat hat, somehow still intact after everything they had been through. "I have researched your world," Crix said, her crystalline voice carefully modulated to convey the gravity of what she was about to say. Emma tilted her head with that curious expression her classmates had learned to associate with incoming humor. "Yeah, lots of people seem to be doing that lately. You have earthquakes," Crix continued. "Hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, apex predators in nearly every ecosystem. Pathogens that mutate faster than most species can develop immunity. All true. Your own son causes cancer." Emma nodded, apparently unsurprised that her star's tendency to cause cellular mutation was now common knowledge among her classmates. "It does. Yeah. That's why we invented sunscreen." Crix's crystal structure hummed with frequencies that indicated she was processing something profound. "And you require no permission slips," she said. "To travel to hazardous worlds, to face dangerous situations, to make decisions that could result in your death." Emma smiled, and it was a warm expression that somehow made the galactic corridor feel like home. "If we needed permission slips for everything dangerous," she said, "we would never go anywhere, never try anything, never achieve anything. We'd still be sitting in caves waiting for someone to tell us it was safe to come out. But it was never safe." "No," Emma agreed. "It was never safe, and we went out anyway." They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps echoing in the corridor as other students and administrators passed by with curious glances. Crix finally spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Your species did not become spacefaring despite your world," she said slowly, working through the realization as she spoke. "You became spacefaring because of it." Emma stopped walking and turned to face her crystalline classmate. "What do you mean? You were already surviving the unsurvivable," Crix explained, her form shimmering with the effort of articulating something that was reshaping her understanding of the universe. "Every day on your planet was a battle against forces that should have destroyed you. Every generation was a victory against extinction." She paused, her many facets catching the light of the corridor. "Space was not a new challenge for you," she continued. "It was simply another environment to figure out, another impossible thing to survive through stubbornness and spite and refusal to accept that you could not do it." Emma was quiet for a long moment, considering this perspective on her own species. "I never really thought about it that way," she admitted. "I guess when you grow up on Earth, you just assume everyone learns to deal with stuff like we do." "They do not," Crix said firmly. "Most species evolve on stable worlds with predictable environments and manageable threats. They develop societies that prioritize safety and caution because those qualities ensure survival." "That makes sense. But your world," Crix continued, "your impossible death world with its earthquakes and predators and radioactive sun, it taught your species something different. It taught you that safety is an illusion and caution is sometimes a luxury, and the only way to survive is to act. To adapt, to fight, to try." Emma smiled again. But this time, there was something deeper in her expression. A recognition of a truth she had always lived but never articulated. My grandmother used to say that life doesn't wait for you to be ready, she said. She grew up during a war and raised 6 kids during an economic collapse, and when she was 80 years old, she learned how to use the internet because she refused to be left behind by technology. She sounds remarkable. She was just human, Emma said. And somehow that simple statement carried the weight of everything Crix had been trying to understand. They resumed walking. And as they approached the main campus area, Crix made a decision. Emma, she said, her crystalline voice carrying a note of determined curiosity. Earlier on the shuttle, you offered me something called chocolate. Emma's eyes lit up with surprise and delight. Yeah, but you said no. I am reconsidering, Crix said. You mentioned that it was mildly toxic to many galactic species, but you also said it was worth the risk. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a small wrapped square. It won't hurt you badly, she promised. Maybe a little digestive discomfort at worst. And the taste is really something special. Crix accepted the chocolate with careful, crystalline fingers. It felt warm from being stored near the human's body. And it smelled like something she had never encountered before. Rich and complex and entirely alien, she looked at Emma, then at the chocolate, then back at Emma. You face death every day on your world, she said. And yet you still find joy in small pleasures like this. That's exactly why we find joy in small pleasures like this, Emma replied. Because you never know which moment might be your last. So you better enjoy the ones you have. Crix placed the chocolate in the specialized intake port of her containment field. The V sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced, sweet and bitter at the same time. Rich and complex and yes, slightly toxic in a way that made her crystalline structure tingle with unfamiliar sensations. But beneath all of that, there was something else. There was the understanding of why a species that lived on a death world would create something like this, would take the time to cultivate plants and process ingredients, and craft a confection that existed purely for the purpose of pleasure, because that was what humans did. They took the chaos and danger of their existence, and they created beauty from it. They built shelters from storms and threw rocks at predators and survived extinction events, and then they made chocolate because life should have moments of sweetness. It is good, Crix admitted, her crystalline voice carrying notes of wonder. Emma grinned. Told you it was worth the risk. Behind them, Professor Velkith was being escorted to an emergency meeting with the Academy's board of directors ahead of them. The rest of their class was dispersing to their dormitories to process the incredible experience they had shared. But in this moment, a human and a Valorian stood together in a corridor between worlds, sharing a piece of chocolate and an understanding that would reshape both of their perspectives forever. Crix looked at her human friend and felt something she had never